Come and discover Portugal with us. Please like, subscribe, and leave your comment. Your support and opinions are very important to us. Thank you. The city of Olivenza is located on the left bank of the river Guadiana and is now part of the province of Badajoz in the Spanish autonomous community of Extremadura. This place is the focal point of a long-running dispute that began more than 200 years ago and is the last vestige of several centuries of strife and confrontation between Portugal and Spain. For more than 5 centuries, Olivenza was one of the borders of the Kingdom of Portugal, and this heritage is evident throughout the city, from its urban layout to its main monument. That's why discovering this city also means getting to know an important part of Portuguese history and culture, regardless of any diplomatic or legal differences between the two countries. This area was invaded by Islamic forces in the 8th century and became part of the Taifa of Badajoz, an independent Muslim kingdom that emerged after the collapse of the Caliphate of Córdoba in the 11th century. With the advance of the forces of the Christian kingdoms of the north from the 12th century onwards, the region of Olivenza was the target of various military expeditions and incursions, being located in the area of expansion of the Kingdom of Leon. The date of its definitive conquest is unknown, but it probably occurred around 1230 during the last campaigns of King Alfonso IX. In the middle of the 13th century, during the reign of Alfonso X of Castile, Olivenza was handed over to the Order of the Temple as compensation for services rendered during the conquest and in order to guarantee the settlement and defense of that territory. It may have been the Templars who fortified the site, as it was located in a border region between the Christian kingdoms and Al-Andalus. At the same time, the Kingdom of Portugal was also expanding to the south and southeast, with several campaigns taking place on the left bank of the river Guadiana. King Alfonso X of Castile then decided to establish the course of the Caya and Guadiana rivers as the border between the domains of Castile and Portugal in 1267, removing Olivenza from the Templar sphere and integrating the town into the municipality and bishopric of Badajoz. The internal situation in Castile was to undergo profound changes with the death of King Sancho IV in 1295, leaving his 10-year-old son as his successor and his mother, Maria de Molina, taking over the regency until he came of age. During this period, several nobles rose up against the king, questioning his legitimacy and demanding benefits in exchange for loyalty. These intrigues were also fueled by neighboring kingdoms, including King Denis, who reigned in Portugal at the time. The king decided to support Prince John's claim to the throne of Castile by declaring war on that kingdom. Internal upheaval in Castile and the threat of war with Portugal, and at the same time with the Muslim forces to the south, created the context for the signing of the Treaty of Alcañices in 1297. With this treaty, Portugal's borders were defined and rights over regions such as Aroche, Aracena, Ayamonte, Herrera de Alcántara and Valencia de Alcántara passed to Castile, receiving in exchange possession of the lands of Ribacoa, which included Almeida, Castelbon, Castelmelhor, Montfort and Vilar Maior, and the possession of the castles of Alfaiate, Castel Rodrigo and Sabugal was also recognized. The towns of Campo Maior, Urgella, Jurumanha and Olivença passed to Portugal's definitive possession in what is now Alentejo. In 1306, King Denis expanded the original Templar defences of Olivença, giving it a square fortress defended by 14 towers. King Afonso IV completed this project with the construction of a citadel, which was finished in 1335. In the final third of the 14th century, in the context of the Fernandine Wars, the city received a new oval-shaped enclosure with a total of 5 gates. Despite having been completely demolished, the layout of this wall is still discernible today through the shape that has persisted in the urban fabric of the oldest part of Olivença. During the succession crisis of 1383-1385, Olivença passed back into the possession of Castile until 1389, when King John I of Portugal signed the Second Treaty of Monção, which restored this and other towns to Portuguese possession. During the reign of King John II, the tallest keep among all of the border castles was erected in the grounds of the Olivença citadel, rising to a height of 35 meters. The castle also received a flooded moat. Under King Manuel I of Portugal, the Fernandine enclosure was demolished and replaced by a new wall, the layout of which is depicted by Duarte de Armas in his Book of Fortresses, dated 1509. It was also during this reign that the Ajuda Bridge was built, a fortified bridge designed to connect the two banks of the river Guadiana, allowing the passage of goods and military resources in support of Olivença. The bridge, 380 meters long and 5.5 meters wide, was supported by 19 archers and defended by a 3-story tower erected in its center. This work was paid for by all the inhabitants of the kingdom except those of Olivença. These buildings were a sign of the strategic and even symbolic importance of Olivença, reinforced by its elevation to the episcopal see of the Diocese of Ceuta, led by Bishop Henrique de Coimbra. As a friar, he was famous for his missionary work in India and Africa. He traveled on Pedro Álvares de Cabral fleet that landed in Brazil in 1500 and celebrated the first Catholic Mass there on 26 April of that year. At that time, Olivença was the site of important buildings, such as the Church of St Mary Magdalene, one of the most important examples of Manueline architecture, the Convent of St Francis, and the Santa Casa da Misericórdia. Within the city, the greatest symbol of this urban development is the imposing Church of St Mary Magdalene, whose construction was ordered by King Manuel I at the beginning of the 16th century. To raise funds for this building, the imposition rent was created, taxing the sale of salted fish, meat and wine, raising 100,000 Portuguese reais a year for the people of Olivença. This construction didn't begin until the second decade of the 16th century. There is no certainty as to who designed this temple. It has been attributed to the Ajuda brothers, but also to Martim Lourenço. The main facade is marked by the central bell tower, on which stands the axial portal, surmounted by a large oculus, framed with twisted motifs and half-spheres. The Renaissance portal has a round arch decorated with cherubs, flanked by pilasters and topped by a frieze, both decorated with grotesques. It has been attributed to the French sculptor Nicolas de Chantereine. The portal arch is flanked by two busts depicting a bearded man wearing armor and a woman wearing a palla, a Roman-style garment fastened with a fibula on her shoulder. It is surmounted by a triangular pediment framing a coat of arms, topped by the figures of three putti. The Church of St Mary Magdalene has two side portals, both in full Manueline style. The one on the northwest facade is three-lobed and is set within a recess, accessible via 4 steps. It is flanked by 2 colonnades, their capitals and the space between them decorated with plant elements. At the top, in addition to representations of foliage and flowers, there is a figure of a putti. The portal on the southeast facade has a similar decoration to the one on the opposite side of the temple. Its arch is also three-lobed and is divided by an artichoke, symbolizing regeneration and resurrection, and a group of pomegranates, symbolizing fertility. The exterior of this church is marked by the presence of more than 24 gargoyles, a typical element of the Gothic style, of which the Manueline is a late phase. They represent grotesque figures with a practical function, draining excess water from the roofs, and, at the same time, a symbolic one, an apotropaic element to ward off evil. The exterior decoration also includes other sculpted elements such as representations of monstrous creatures and winged figures, some angelic and others frightening. The interior of the Church of St Mary Magdalene is divided into 3 naves, the central one being taller and wider than the side naves and divided into 5 bays. The magnificent spiral columns immediately stand out, 6 on each side supporting round arches. Above these are windows that illuminate the central nave. Spiral columns are a characteristic element of Manueline architecture, having appeared in the very first building attributable to this style, the Convent of Jesus in Setúbal. They evoke the shape of the rigging used on ships of the time. There are 3 chapels on each side of the temple, all topped by large windows. On the epistle side there are the chapels of St John of God, of our Lord Jesus of the Steps, and of the Souls. On the Gospel side are the chapels of St Vincent Ferrer, St Peter and St Lucy. The decoration of all these chapels dates back to the 18th century, and 5 of them are framed by 18th century tiles. The altarpieces in these chapels are in the Baroque style, with elements in gilded and painted wood carvings, as well as others carved in marble. The chancel is preceded by a multifoil triumphal arch reminiscent of a draped curtain, similar to the one in the Church of St Mary of Marvila in Santarém. It has a star vault with 21 bosses and an imposing Baroque altarpiece in gilded wood carving. Flanking the tabernacle are images of St Martha and St Mary Magdalene, to whom this church is dedicated. In the lower section there are 2 panels of 18th century historiated tiles depicting scenes from the New Testament. The side chapel on the epistle side is dedicated to Our Lady of the Conception and contains the tabernacle. On the Gospel side is the other side chapel, whose invocation is the death of Christ and the sepulchre. In this chapel is the tomb of the aforementioned Bishop of Ceuta, Friar Henrique de Coimbra, who died in Olivenza in 1532. It is a sculptural work attributed to Nicolas de Chantereine. The vault of the chancel and the ribbed vaults that cover the central nave have a set of keystones decorated with a series of coats of arms that identify the main sponsors of this construction. These include the coat of arms of King Manuel I, this one polychromed and gilded, the Cross of the Order of Christ, and the coats of arms of Portugal, Olivenza, Dom Jorge de Lencastre, the Marquis of Ferreira, Dom Rodrigo de Melo, and Bishop Henrique de Coimbra. The Church of St Mary Magdalene is one of the most important examples of Manueline architecture, a typically Portuguese style, which emphasizes the irony of being located in the heart of a city administered by Spain for over 2 centuries. One of the most striking testimonies to the architectural and artistic splendor of Olivenza during the reign of King Manuel I can be found in the town hall building, which is now occupied by the local ayuntamiento. Its Manueline-style portal is one of the icons of this city, decorated with plant elements in its multi-lobed arch. Above it is the shield of Olivenza, surrounded by 3 coats of arms of Portugal, and flanked by 2 armillary spheres, a symbol of King Manuel I. At the top is the cross of the Order of Christ. This portal was probably built at the same time as the Church of St Mary Magdalene, possibly by the same stonemasons, and it has even been suggested that it may have come from that church, being removed after the construction of the Renaissance portal that can still be seen there today. The Santa Casa de Misericórdia established a brotherhood in Olivenza in 1501 and occupied the Chapel of the Holy Spirit from 1520 onwards. In the middle of the 16th century, the church was rebuilt and enlarged in the Mannerist style, which is still clearly visible in the main portal. The interior of the church has a single nave, immediately revealing the result of the remodeling carried out here between the end of the 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century, which added a fully Baroque decoration with several carved altars. The beautiful panels of historiated blue tiles on a white background stand out. Those covering the walls of the nave and chancel depict the works of mercy, and those in the upper choir depict a garden and a group of friars. They were created by artists such as Manuel dos Santos, Gabriel del Barco, and the master PMP. On 19 June 1580, the city was taken by the forces of Philip II of Spain, who would later be recognized as King Philip I of Portugal at the court of Tomar in 1581. It was during this period that the Church of St Mary of the Castle was rebuilt. As its name suggests, this church is located within the area of the Olivenza Castle and is the oldest church in the city. Its original construction dates back to the 13th century, when the Knights Templar settled this region. In the 16th century, the church was too small for the size of the parish, which is why it was rebuilt and enlarged in 1584, with the work being completed in 1627. The main facade has a centered bell tower where the church's main portal stands. This portal, with a round arch, is flanked by 2 ornate columns with 2 empty niches at the top. At the base of the columns are very stylized bas-relief carvings of 2-headed eagles, the symbol of Austria from where the Habsburgs came, the house to which the monarchs of the Philippine Dynasty belonged. On the left, there is an inscription indicating the name of the architect, André de Arenas, and the year of construction, 1584. The church also has a Manueline-style side portal with a 3-lobed arch surmounted by the dove of the Holy Spirit and the cross of the Order of Christ. The interior of the church is immediately striking for its spaciousness, being divided into 3 naves with vaults of equal height, corresponding to the typology of hall churches. Its decorative sobriety fits in with the so-called plain style, which marked Mannerism in Portugal. This lack of decoration is highlighted by the tall columns, topped by Ionic capitals, entirely carved in grey marble. The naves are covered by groin vaults. The side chapel on the epistle side, dedicated to Our Lady of the Conception, has a Renaissance altarpiece topped by the symbol of the Holy Spirit. It has 4 oil paintings on canvas depicting the Annunciation, the Adoration of the Shepherds, the Adoration of the Magi, and the Circumcision. The Baroque chancel contrasts with the austerity of the naves and is completely covered in gilded woodwork from the 18th century. At the top are three images representing the theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. The gilded woodwork even covers the vault, the only exception being the lower part of the side walls, decorated with 18th century panels of tiles painted with blue on a white background, depicting the taking of Jericho and the defense of Gibeon. The side chapel on the Gospel side contains an exceptional altarpiece depicting the tree of Jesse, which illustrates the family tree of Jesus Christ starting with Jesse, King David's father. This artistic representation has medieval origins, appearing in altarpieces in the Church of the Convent of St Francis in Estremoz and the Church of St Mary in Beja, as well as in three churches in the northern region of Portugal, in Porto, Braga and Caminha. On the wall of the nave on the epistle side there is a niche with an image of Our Lady of Fatima, a chapel dedicated to St. Anthony, and the Chapel of the Souls, the latter with a showy altarpiece in 18th century gilded woodwork framed by 17th century tiles. In the nave on the Gospel side is an image of Christ crucified and the Chapel of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, whose altarpiece has parts in gilded and polychrome wood carving. It also features 17th century tile panels in the pattern known as Misericórdia. Under the choir loft, on the Gospel side, there is the Chapel of Prayer in the garden, containing images of Christ tied to the column and the Lord of the Green Cane, made in Portugal and dating back to the 18th century. On the opposite side, also under the choir loft, is the baptistry, which contains a marble font and a Baroque mural painting on the vault. A son of the nobleman Bento de Matos Mexia was baptized here. His godfather was King John V of Portugal, who was visiting on 11 November 1716. With the start of the Restoration War in 1640, Olivenza saw its strategic importance renewed. The Manueline wall was demolished and its stone used to build a new star-shaped polygonal enclosure with 9 bastions. This layout was designed by the Jesuit mathematician, architect and military engineer Johannes Sieremans, known as Cosmander, a Dutchman who was also responsible for the work on the fortresses of the city of Elvas. The city managed to resist 4 assaults by invading troops under the command of the Duke of San German, eventually falling into Spanish hands in 1657 following the 5th attack. In January 1658, António Luís Menezes, 3rd Count of Cantanhede and future 1st Marquis of Marialva, reconquered Olivença for the Portuguese. After the signing of the Treaty of Lisbon in 1668, the Restoration War ended and Olivença experienced a short period of peace. This time was used to reinforce the defenses of the city's stronghold and to rebuild the Ajuda Bridge, whose center arches were blown up in 1709 during the War of the Spanish Succession. The bridge has remained in ruins ever since. In the first half of the 18th century, major work was carried out in Olivença, with the construction of structures such as the cavalry and infantry barracks, the central barracks, the St. Barbara magazine, and the St. John of God military hospital. In the second half of the same century, Portugal adopted a strictly defensive policy with regard to its position on the left bank of the Guadiana River, as all the foreign military architects who visited it recommended its strategic abandonment. The reasons for this decision included the vast amount of human and military resources needed to maintain Olivenza in a state of defense, the logistical fragility of maintaining and using the Ajuda Bridge, which also made the withdrawal of any army coming to the city's aid very difficult. This scenario takes us to the dawn of the 19th century and the genesis of what is still known today as the Olivença question. In the last quarter of the 18th century, the American War of Independence in 1776 and the French Revolution in 1789 created a polarization in European political life between supporters of France and supporters of England. In Portugal, Queen Maria I aimed to maintain a position of neutrality in the conflict between England and her former colony of the United States of America. In 1782, Portugal joined the First League of Armed Neutrality, seeking freedom of movement in maritime trade. This period was also marked by peace with neighboring Spain, with the two countries putting an end to their territorial disputes in South America and culminating in the double wedding between the Portuguese princes João and Mariana Vitória and the Spanish princes Gabriel and Carlota Joaquina. Fear of the spread of revolutionary ideas from France led several European countries, including Portugal, to reinforce their means of defense and seize French ships, preventing Republican troops from landing. In 1793, Portugal and Spain signed a mutual aid treaty against the French, sending 6,000 Portuguese soldiers to support the Spanish army in repelling the Gallic forces in the War of the Pyrenees. Spain and France ended hostilities in 1795 with the signing of the Treaty of Basel without the knowledge of the Portuguese government. Portugal was thus left in a complex position in a state of war with France, with whom Spain had now allied itself. The conditions put forward by France to achieve peace forced Portugal to abandon its alliance with England, prohibiting English ships from entering Portuguese ports and facilitating French trade in Portugal and Brazil. The eventual abandonment of the alliance with England would lead that country to attack Portugal's colonies and to close its maritime routes. Portugal then tried to remain neutral, but it didn't have the resources to do so. In 1797, Spain began concentrating troops near the border, trying to put pressure on Portugal to accept French demands. In 1801, Spain and France signed a new agreement which provided for the invasion of Portugal if it did not accept the conditions imposed by the French. In 6 February of that year, the Spanish ambassador in Lisbon delivered an ultimatum obliging Portugal to respond within 15 days. The talks launched to try and reach a different conclusion ended in failure. On 27 February, Charles IV of Spain signed the declaration of war on Portugal, the latter having opted to maintain the alliance with England. France pressurized Spain, and Spain pressurized Portugal. On 20 May 1801 began what would become known as the War of the Oranges, with the Spanish Vanguard Division entering Portugal in the Elvas region. That same day, the Spanish forces commanded by Manuel Godoy besieged Olivenza, and Governor Júlio César Augusto Chermont decided to surrender it without any resistance. A few days later, on 6 June 1801, the Treaty of Badajoz was signed, marking the end of the War of the Oranges. Portugal is forced to close its harbours to English ships to definitively hand over the territory and population of Olivenza, keeping the River Guadiana as its border with Portugal, and to compensate Spain for the damage caused during the conflict. On the other hand, Spain guaranteed Portugal the maintenance of all its territories. The terms were rejected by the first consul of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, who kept his troops in Spanish territory, thus forcing Portugal to sign a new law on 29 September 1801, the so-called Treaty of Madrid, which required the payment of compensation of 20 million francs. After the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, in which the British Navy defeated the navies of France and Spain, Napoleon failed in his attempt to invade Great Britain, decreeing the continental blockade in 1806. Portugal refused to accept the terms of this blockade. Spain and France then secretly signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau in 1807, which provided for the passage of French troops through Spanish territory with a view to invading Portugal, with the division of territory between the two countries being established at the end of the invasion. This treaty preceded the start of the Peninsular War, also known as the French Invasions, which led to the withdrawal of King John VI of Portugal to Brazil, and the declaration of nullity on 1 May 1808 of the Treaty of Badajoz for just cause due to the invasion of Portuguese territory. This is the basis for the de-recognition of the Spanish occupation of Olivenza provided for in the treaty. Once the war was over and the Napoleonic forces had been defeated, the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1814, on whose third article it was written, especially the treaties signed in Badajoz and Madrid in 1801 are null and void. At the Congress of Vienna that followed, Portugal once again demanded the annulment of the Treaty of Badajoz and the return of Olivenza. This demand was included in Article 105, but the Spanish delegation present in Austria refused to sign the treaty in 1815. Spain didn't sign the treaty until 10 June 1817, but compliance with it was repeatedly postponed. In 1821, from Brazil, Portugal occupied the Cisplatina province, which corresponds to the territory of present-day Uruguay. This invasion supported the Spanish justification for interrupting the ongoing talks on the return of Olivenza. Spain argued that the Treaty of Badajoz of 1801 was still valid, and that the Treaty of Vienna has no legal strength to force the city to be handed over to Portugal. The demarcation of the common border between Portugal and Spain, which began in 1864, was interrupted by Portugal's failure to recognize Spanish sovereignty over Olivenza. Officially, Portugal never recognized Olivenza as Spanish territory, although it also never made any diplomatic or other efforts to effectively change the situation. Over the decades, with particular impact during the years of the Francoist regime, the Portuguese language and culture were deliberately suppressed, street names were changed, and the colonization of the city by inhabitants from other regions of Spain was promoted. The rapprochement of the two countries from the 1980s onwards, particularly after their entry into the European Union and the creation of the Schengen area, led to the border no longer being an issue, given the possibility of free passage between the two territories. Progressively, the Portuguese cultural legacy has been regaining its place, whether in the use of toponymic plaques with the original names of the streets, or by teaching Portuguese courses. Several people from Olivenza now have dual nationality by choice. Since 2008, Olivenza has been part of a Euro-region that includes several municipalities in Portugal and Spain. However, the Olivenza issue is not over and continues to occasionally emerge in the Portuguese news. Thank you for discovering Portugal with us. If you liked the video, please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel to follow our new releases.